Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating in this training session and meeting with us today. The aim of this session is to provide you with tools and skills on how to manage the research outputs and how to do an output management plan. The foundation seeks to disseminate the results of projects and make them available as soon as possible to other research and wider society. Open science is a movement which aims to make scientific research results and data accessible to everyone. In terms of scientific publications, it means seeking to open access as soon as possible. But for other results or outputs, such as data, it means they must be preserved in a way that makes them findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Basically, the four principles Ignacio will be talking later today. With this aim in mind, all beneficiaries must submit an output management plan within the first 6 months of the project. Among other aspects, the plan should refer to the outputs that will be generated, how and when they will be shared, where they will be available, how they will be preserved, and in case of sensitive data, the nature of any processing that will be undertaken to meet applicable current legislation. This is very important for us, and this is what we'll be talking about today. The session will be led by Dr. Ignasi Labastida, Director of the CaixaResearch and Innovation Unit at the Universitat de Barcelona, and the leader of the Creative Commons project in Spain since 2003. And most important of all, our expert in this matter. He's not only the person in charge of this training, but he also will be reviewing your output management plans, and you can contact him through the system for any help you may need during all the process. We really wish this session is useful for researchers and project managers to keep learning in this important matter. Just 2 technical details. After the Ignasi's presentation, you will be able to ask questions. For this, please raise your hand through the Zoom tool and wait for your turn. When Ignasi gives you the floor, please turn on your microphone and your camera and go ahead. Until then, maybe it's better that you keep your cameras and microphones off. It's a pleasure again to have you here, and Ignasi, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carla, for this kind presentation, and good morning to everyone, to all the grantees of this call. Yes, the aim of the session is to provide you with these skills and tools to feel and understand the output management plan. Mainly, I will focus on the data management plan, so meaning what to do with the research data, because probably is where people has more problems or more questions about it. But if you want, afterwards we can discuss about other topics, publications or software or whatever. If you have any urgent question, you can also raise your hand or put in the chat any question during my presentation. If not, as Carla said, we can wait till the end. But please don't hesitate to interrupt me at any moment if you have any urgent question, because I also am happy to answer at that time. I will use some slides that it will be provided to you after the session. And if there is nothing else to say, let's move on to the presentation. I share the presentation. And as I said, we want to focus on research data, because I think it's where there will be more questions around the output management plan. And the talk will be around, first of all, the context. Carla already mentioned the idea of open science. What is the meaning of open science? A lot of people is talking about open science. Portugal and Spain, we have some initiatives, some national plans, some national activities. Also, we can discuss what we are looking for when we're talking about research data output, research outputs. We'll discuss that. I also want to share with you which are the requirements from funders, institutions, and journals to show you that this policy from La Caixa is not a lonely policy, and there are not other policies, similar policies around. Otherwise, there are many now requirements coming from funders, institutions, and even journals asking you to share more outputs than in the past. We will review these FAIR principles. Maybe some of you already are familiar with the term, but sometimes people have heard about FAIR, but not really get into the deep understanding. We will discuss about the planning, what it means to have a plan before starting the research. And that's the reason we ask to have this output management plan in the first months of your activities. I will also mention some ethical considerations. Carl already mentioned that. I think it's important also when we are trying to foster the opening of the results, but we have to take into consideration some ethical and legal issues, and also to take into account that in some of your projects probably there will be some privacy issues, and it's important to know them. Also some tips about working with data and sharing data. And at the end, probably if we have time, I can show you some cases that I think are interesting to be used as an example on how to do a good data management plan. And I think also I have some bad cases or not good experiences also to share with you. So let's start from the beginning, and let's see the context. Where are we? We are in this open science movement, activity, framework, and I'm going to share here a taxonomy made by the Foster Project, a project funded by the Commission a few years ago, where they try to define open science by means of this taxonomy. At the end, looking at this taxonomy, you can say, well, it's a research taxonomy because we have here all the different aspects and topics of research. And the only difference is that we tag everything with an open. I hope one day there will be no need to talk about open science or open research or open scholarship, because it will be open by default. And one day we'll need to talk about the closed science or closed research, because sometimes, and we'll see it in a few minutes, some outputs, some activities need to be closed to, for instance, to respect the privacy of the people or to keep the confidentiality with other third parties, etc. But here, this taxonomy has access, talking about the publications, this policy that you also have from La Caixa. Talking about data, when I talk about data, I prefer to talk about the management of the research data than to talk about open data, because, as I said, not all data can be open. I will repeat the karma from the Commission saying that data should be as open as possible, but also as close as necessary. Also, our aim is to try to reproduce or replicate the research. We have also this opening discussion now about the evaluation, how we may change the way we evaluate research. And also we have policies and tools, etc. We can also use some definitions. I put here a definition that was established a few years ago by the European Commission, and it defines open science as something that has a goal. And the goal is to transform this science, so meaning research. I have to say that science, this term science is understood as any kind of research, any kind of field of research. So this aim to transform science through these tools, networks, media, with the goal to make research more open, global, collaborative, creative, probably the most important, closer to society. But without forgetting the values of efficiency, quality, integrity, very important, integrity, reproducibility, equity, transparency, and public engagement. So that's the idea, that's the context where we are. There have been many calls and roadmaps and statements in favor of open science. I bring here one from the Amsterdam Call for Action on Open Science that was created in 2016 when the Netherlands were the president of the European Council. And this call for action has a specific goal on data. And I want to share this text with you because there is a very different approach when we talk about publications and when we talk about data. If you look at the first point, the goal was to have full open access for all scientific publications. But when we talk about data, we don't say that full open access to all data. It says that what we are aiming at is that this new approach to have an optimal reuse of the research data. So the idea is to try to have research data. And when I say data here, we can also talk about research outputs to try to foster the reuse of the data. So it's not enough to just post a file in, let's say, any repository, and that's it. It's more that we need to post the file in a way that could be reusable for anyone that it could be interested in your output. And for that, at that time, they were calling for new ways of to share the data, but also to find definitions, to have standards and infrastructures. And what is important is not just to share, it's also to have this activity of stewardship. So it's important that you as researchers get some help from this, what we call the data stewards, people probably in your research centers, in your universities that can help you in this process of managing your research data. More and more institutions, research institutions, universities, even research teams have these profiles, these new people helping on managing all the process of the research data. Of course, from this time, 2016, from now, there has been new definitions. We have these FAIR principles that we'll discuss in a minute. We have new standards, we have new infrastructures, new repositories, new ways of sharing data, looking for this optimal reuse of the data. And at the end, the final goal, especially from the European Commission, is to have this European Open Science Cloud. I don't know if you are familiar with this EOSC. Many times I share this idea or this initiative with some researchers. They look at me like first time I've heard this term, but this is a project that has been supported by the Commission for many years and investing a lot of money. And the idea is not to build a new infrastructure, it's to connect the existing infrastructures at the national level, but also at the international level. These infrastructures that are already on in these huge infrastructures for research in Europe. And the idea is to have a kind of search engine where you could make any query looking for any research output that you are interested of, and you really don't care if the output is in Barcelona, in Oslo, in Dublin, in Porto, because at the end, what is important is that you have this access. And for that, we need that our outputs need to be fair. So meaning that we need to follow this idea of making our outputs findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we will go back to the FAIR principles, but just to advance that FAIR doesn't mean open. FAIR can be closed, and the importance of reusability is not just to be open by means of, let's say, a license. It can be also closed if you open the metadata, if you share the information about your output, and if you mention how this output can be reusable, how this output can be reachable, how they can reach you and ask permission for reuse. So let's start by understanding what is research data. And it's important to say that research data, when we talk about research data, and again, it could be also seen as a research software, data has a cycle of life. I mean, you create data, or even you can reuse data, existing data, and that was one of the goals from this Amsterdam call. You process the data, you analyze the data, you may preserve part of the data, and also we have to learn on how to not preserve or delete some of the not useful data. And then you can grant access to the data. And by granting access to the data, some other people can reuse it and start again. And it's important to have this cycle into mind when we make our output management plan, because the idea is that we need to think about how our output, in this case, the data, will be in each of these point of the life cycle. So we have to think about which will be the data I create, how they will be processed, analyzed, preserved, shared, etc. We can see the same cycle by looking at the research cycle in general. So initiating research, conducting, preserving, sharing, and build on existing research. And outside, we see what is related with the data. So when we apply for a grant, we may be aware that we will need to have a data management plan, that we'll need to share our data as open as possible and as close as necessary. For that, it's important also that before we start our research, to organize our data by means of this management plan. During the research, we will generate, store, process, analyze our data. So we need to take into account when we're planning where I'm going to store my data, how I'm going to process my data, who will be accessing to my data, etc. It's important that if you have sensible data, to have a storage facility that fulfills the requirements or the legal requirements, for instance, of the European regulation on personal data. Also, it's important to know that if we want to preserve the data, some formats are the most suitable. And especially when you are looking for a place to store, finally, after you project your data, so by preserving your data, you may have knowledge in advance on which are the best formats that are the formats that they will preserve for you. Sometimes these final archives, they are committed to preserve just a few formats. So it's important that at the beginning, when we start our research, maybe we might have a choice. So by thinking where my data is going to be preserved at the end of my project, maybe you can make this choice at the beginning and not at the end with the possible risk of losing some information. When you share your data and any other findings, you can publish them. You can publish your papers in your journals or your chapters in a book, but you can also publish your data. And it's important to publish your data independently of the journal, even though you can connect them by means of DOIs or any other persistent identifiers. At the end, any published data can be cited as any other output. And also it's important to share any script, any software that might be useful to understand your results, but also to reuse any data or any other output you publish. And finally, when this is available, someone may use that and to start again all the process of research. We can also look for definitions of data, of research data. And it's hard to say this is the single definition of data, because at the end, data must be understood in a different way depending on your discipline, if your field of expertise. Because for some people, data is an image. For other people, data is just a figure. For others, it's a text. So at the end, what is important is that data is somehow the evidence in the research process that is accepted by your community, as this is the initial evidence that can help us or can facilitate the validation of your findings and the results. We can classify data for its origin, so saying that it's experimental data, observational data, simulated data. Also, we can say if it's from third parties, from the public administration. And of course, we can talk about the raw data or primary data and also the secondary data. What is important at the end, and we'll see it in a moment, is that when you publish your findings, your outputs, probably you will need to publish something else than just an article or a text, a document. It's important to publish the data that could help on validating your findings, your results, and even to facilitate the replication or reproducibility of them. So what are you required to? As I said, you have many requirements nowadays about outputs. As I said, from 2014, the European Commission is requiring to share data of any European project. And it's important to know that at the end, what they are asking, in fact, is to make a data management plan in a very similar way that what you required now from La Caixa with this output management plan. An output management plan, along with the data management plan, can say that everything needs to be closed. So it doesn't mean that a data management plan is you are obliged to say everything has to be open. No, because if you are working with a sensible data, personal data, data that at the end cannot be open in any way, then you can state that. But it's important that in your output management plan, you state your strategies on how to preserve these privacy issues or ethical issues and how you're going to put your data in a safe way. So take that into account. Any funder will accept, and of course it can be otherwise, the need of closing some specific data. And you can justify that in a very easy way. However, if you don't have these issues, the idea is to share your data following the FAIR principles. So meaning that placing your data in a place that could be findable alone with a paper. So meaning that it's not placing the data as supplementary material as we did in the past. It's placing the data in specific repositories where this data could be found and also could be connected by this European Open Science Cloud and any other search engine that could be established. Also to discuss about the accessibility, the interoperability, and at the end, the reusability of the data. In a similar way, the La Caixa is asking you to share your data as open as possible and make this output management plan. We'll see it in a minute how to fill the output management plan, but again, it's the same. It's to explain how you're going to manage your outputs. What are you planning to do? And of course, these data management plans, these output management plans are dynamic because when you start your project, you may have an idea of what you want to do. But during the activities of research, things change. Suddenly some new data appear or new activities appear, or you are not granted the access you're supposed to have. So output management plans, data management plans are dynamic documents that may change during all the process of your project. So the funders, here I just showed a couple of them, will ask you for a data management plan, for an explanation on how you're going to fulfill these principles of fair data. And at the end, that you publish any data related to your published outputs. So it's not that you have to share your data at the initial moment that you create or you experiment and you gather the data. Is at the end when you share your results. At the same time that you share your papers, you can share any output. As I say, data, software, methodologies, whatever. With this idea, as open as possible, as close as necessary. But also you have to be aware that more and more you might find your publisher. So when you want to publish in a journal, the publisher will ask you for a statement of data availability. There are different policies. I just put here 3 different policies. One that probably is an old policy because it has been established many years ago from PLOS, the Public Library of Science Journals, that's saying that authors are required to make all data necessary to replicate their study, unless there is any ethical or legal restriction. You need to share your data, and you have to indicate that. There is another example, this journal Ecology and Evolution, that they say that it's required as condition for publication that the data supporting the results in the paper should be archived in an appropriate public archive. And they put here some examples as GenBank, Treebase, Dryad, but at the end they say any other suitable long-term and stable public repository. So you'll see even in the funders and the journals or publishers that there is not an obligation of publishing in a specific repository. we'll analyze the point of the repositories, but I might advance that for me, the best option for you to publish your data and any other output is if you already have a place where you go and look for data from your colleagues, this is the place where you're supposed to share your data. So the first option should be your discipline or thematic repository. If you don't have it, then the option probably will be your institution repository. So ask your institution, and a lot of universities, research centers have already a repository, and then they can provide you the way to share the data and any other output. And we'll see later on that also there are like multidisciplinary repositories, even commercial repositories where you can share the data. But for me, this could be like the third option. Of course, maybe you are aware of what I call the neutral repository, that it's Zenodo, supported by the Commission. This also can be a good solution to share your outputs. And the third policy here is not like a requirement policy, it's more like an encouraging. They say that authors are encouraged to share, but they are not required, meaning that even if you don't share, the process of peer review will go on. But it's important to foster this idea of sharing as much as possible any output of your research. So we have been talking a lot about FAIR, but what is the meaning of FAIR? So these principles that were published in 2016 in an article and they have been reviewed and even updated follow this idea of data should be findable independently, as I said, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And the idea with the findable is to put your data with enough metadata to be understood. Also to use these identifiers, the persistent identifiers. Probably the most known identifiers is the DOI, the same identifier that is used for publications. But also some repositories, instead of DOIs, use other ones like handles or any other identifier that could be persistent. Also important to follow some conventions on names, on version control. So if you are updating your data sets or any other output, there should be this need of explaining which is the difference between one version to another. When we talk about the accessibility of data, it's important to think how open is, if it's open by default or not, where it will be deposited, where it will be placed, this data or outputs at the end of your project when you publish your outputs. And of course, if there is any requirement for or need to use a specific software. The best approach is to share data as standard as possible, but sometimes this data has been created with a specific software. So it's important also to explain if the software is available somewhere, you can point it out there, but also sometimes when you share your data, you can also share together in the same data set the software that is needed to interpret or to use this data. The third element of the FAIR principle is interoperability, and probably the interoperability is the most challenging and the most hard to fulfill, because at the end we would like to have our data to be understood not only by people but also by machines. So by using some standards, some ontologies, some taxonomies. So the idea here is that when you share data, you don't need to reinvent the wheel again and again. You can use some standards that your community, your discipline already are using. So if you use the same variables, it will be easier for you to share your data with your community. If you use the same definitions, the same standards, the same scales, etc., you only need to say, I'm using this standard, this convention, this whatever. If not, what is important is to share your data with enough information, so by means, for instance, of a code book that other people can interpret. This is something that more and more has been improved. But I remember many years ago, at the beginning of sharing data, people were sharing just some tabular data with columns saying F1, F2, F3, but without explaining, or even, for instance, when they were putting genders, they were putting 0, 1, 2, but without understanding what 0 means or 1 means, etc. So that's the idea of the interoperability, to facilitate the sharing and the reuse, and also the merging of your data with other people's data. And as I said, the reusability doesn't mean just open. Of course, it's a good idea to share your data as open as possible, but also you can establish some embargo periods, or you can use some requirements for instance, to use a data user agreement and tell the people, I cannot share this publicly, but if you sign this data user agreement, or you sign this confidentiality clause, or you contact this or the other, you can be able to reuse the data in a more restricted way. So the idea is that when you share your data, and data must be closed or restricted, then also you share some information on how the data could be accessible for anyone who is interested in. You can apply the same FAIR principles to anything. So for instance, here, if you read later on these principles with the compliance, you'll see that here is more addressed, not to the data, but to the deposit or repository. Here is discussing that the findability is that the data or any resources in a public repository, that the metadata got information and has this persistent identifier, or for instance, that there is this interoperability of the repositories. And the idea of the interoperability of the repositories is the idea of the European Open Science Cloud. You need to share your data in a trusted repository, and if you have the choice of repositories that already have some kind of seal of some kind of commitment of being following the FAIR principles or following the standards that the EOS are developing, it's the best choice, instead of trying to make your own repository and then to fulfill all these requirements. Here is the image to show you that there are different levels of fairness. So on the top, we see what is not really fair. Maybe the last one is only what is fair is the metadata. And on the bottom, you have the 3 ways of making your data fair. The first one, by restricting the access to your data, but the data is already preserved in a repository, but with a closed access or restricted access. But there is an identifier, and there is information by means of the metadata, and also explaining which is the provenance of that data. The second one is when the data set is already open. And the third one is some repositories, they already have this functionality that it's not needed to download the data. You can also interact to the data. Any of these 3 options are good enough to fulfill the FAIR principles. So as I said at the beginning, FAIR doesn't mean open. Probably what is the most important is to inform the people that you have the data. And I don't want to scare you, but also I need to advise you, or to tell you, that sometimes if we go into this requirement too high of we want a full interoperability of the data, we might fall into a problem that we may spend more time on verifying data than to making your own research. What I mean is that the full interoperability of the data nowadays is not easy. So probably we need to find a balance, to reach a compromise on how interoperable is my data. And I put here an example of the 5 stars open data that was proposed by Tim Berners-Lee many years ago, when he was discussing this idea of, okay, let's share our data openly, but also we need to take into account how we share our data. if we restrict the definition of open data in a legal matter, open data means that data is available and also has a license that allows us to reuse the data. So he was saying at that time that, okay, I can share the data with a license in a PDF format. For him, PDF was not a suitable format. And therefore, he was placing just 1 star, saying, well, if you share data in these formats, yes, it will be open data, but you will only have 1 star. If instead of PDFs, you use something more suitable like Excel files, or you use other tabular formats like the comma-separated values, then you can get a step further and get 2 or 3 stars. And of course, if you begin to use semantic data into your data, so meaning that you define the things in a connecting with existing definitions, then you can get 4 or 5 data reaching what is called the linked open data, where you're using established information that is already standardized. But it's not easy to reach these 5 stars, because this table that I'm sharing here, well, you may say, well, if I put it in a PDF, you will have 1 star. If you put it in an Excel file, you will get 2, or in the comma-separated values, you will get 3. Well, it's quite interoperable, because we understand what it means Saturday, November, we understand what it means Galway Island, or we even understand the Celsius degrees and the numbers below. Of course, for a machine, it's harder, because we need to establish what is for a machine November, because for them, it's just some letters. So if you want to have the same table in the linked open data, we need to transform that into that. Well, if we need to do that at the end, it will take us a lot of time. So unless we have some automatic connection, we need to reach this compromise. Well, maybe we don't need to share data in this way, but if we share the data, the tables explaining like what is the meaning of everything, explaining the values, explaining the magnitudes, etc., that is good enough to reach enough level of interoperability. But of course, if you have already some ontologies, you have already ways of sharing data in a more close way to the linked open data, better for the interoperability and for the reuse of your data. Okay, so we have this, we have reviewed the definitions, we have reviewed the requirements. Let's start the planification. And as I said, an output management plan or a data management plan must be something dynamic. And what is more important, must be something useful for you. Of course, we are now telling you that we will require this output management plan, and this output management plan will be reviewed. And will be reviewed by my colleague Clara or by myself. And what is more important is that you will receive some feedback. And I think it's important, because there are other funders that will ask you for a data management plan or an output management plan. And sometimes there is this missing part that I think is the most important, is to receive some feedback. What we do in this feedback is to evaluate if the plan is consistent. So it's not that we're going to say, well, this is good or bad. No, we are trying to assess in a way to improve the way you manage your data. So what is more important for me is that this document is useful for you. Don't think of this output management plan as another bureaucratic burden. It's something that helps, we expect to help you on planning what you want to do and to face some situations that you may encounter in the future. So that's the idea, that a data management plan and output management plan is aimed at facilitating this research, also to foresee any possible problems that may arise during your activities and to analyze future situations. Typical cases, what happens at the end of the process? I may grant access during the process to other partners, to other groups, but at the end, they will have the same access. So let's define it at the beginning, not at the end, and we may save some misunderstandings. And that's the idea, just to use it for you. Don't think that I have to feel that and that's it. No, it's important that it is helpful for you. At the end, what we'll ask you is to think about which data, which output you're going to produce, what you're going to gather, observe, which formats are you going to use. If you may use existing data, and if you have enough rights to reuse this data, how you're going to process, store, and preserve it, if they will be accessible for anyone else, the members of your group, your lab, or any other partners you have in your project, when and who could access to that data, who is the responsible, and this is important to take decisions, and also if there is any right involved in your output, who is the rights holder, if you have taken into account any ethical questions, and of course, at the end, how data at the end is going to be reusable. It's going to be completely open, or it's going to require some request or fulfill of agreements to access to your outputs. So questions you can pose yourself is, I'm using personal or sensible data. I'm storing the data in a facility that is safe. This is a special requirement when you, for instance, deal with personal data. Am I using enough standard formats? And if no, I'm fine with the format I'm using. It's going to be preserved in the future. Will my data be understood not by myself after 5 years, but also by any other colleague or any other person that may be interested? Am I authorized to reuse existing data, and until when? I'm sharing my data with my colleagues, how, when, where. And at the end, I'm going to publish my data. Where have I a choice to publish these subject or thematic repositories, or I'm going to use my institutional repository, etc. So this is a template that some of you may be familiar if you have maybe involved in a European project. That I put it here because to show you that it's very similar to the output management plan that you will be required to fill in your project from La Caixa. So you have a summary, an explanation on how to make your data fair, the allocation of resources, security issues, ethical aspects, and any other issue you can add. There are tools also to fill these data management plans, but these tools are just like collaborative tools where they have the templates and you can use them. But in La Caixa, the output management plan already provides you with a platform, and this is where you need to fill your project, your output management plan. So the output management plan is you have this platform where when I receive your output, I will check all the sections that you are required, and I will see it in after this image. And I can provide you with my comments or my colleagues' comments in this output management plan comments. Here, you will receive any feedback. And I must say that in the last calls, many feedback is congratulations. This is a perfect management plan. It fulfills all the requirements. So I think more and more researchers are understanding the requirements of a data management plan, and they are taking into account all the possible situations that you may face in the future. And if not, if in this case, you will be receiving this eligibility check. And if not, if you have some, we might say, oh, maybe this is not really understood. Can you please develop a bit more this point? Or here you mentioned that you are not going to use existing data, but then you say that you're going to take some public data from this repository. So please be coherent or be consistent. And we will give you enough time in this plan review deadline to review it, and we will have a second review. And at the end of the project also, we will ask you for a final review of your data management plan. So to make any update you need to make in your plan that you may change from the beginning. So the different sections that you have in the output management plan is first the summary. So we ask you to describe the data or output that you will generate or collect, the formats and the standards, the value that your outputs may have for other researchers, and why some part of the outputs cannot be shared. The second is the responsibilities. Who is going to monitor the plan? Who is managing the data or the outputs? It could be the same person, but it depends of your group. It depends of the project. You may have other peoples. And who is going to take into this task of preservation and conservation. And what is important also is to specify who will decide about the access when the access is restricted. And if there is, you have already decided who is going to be the rights holder of any intellectual property that may arise from these outputs. Then we enter into the FAIR data and the 4 terms of FAIR. So first, the section on findability, which metadata you're going to use. And you may say, well, I'm publishing this in this repository that they have already a standard scheme, or this repository will provide DOIs on if you are going to use control version, so meaning that the data, you will publish data, but you will update it, and then you will have new DOIs, or you will have new versions establishing the differences between version 1 and version 2. The accessibility is a section where you can explain who is going to access the data and when, how data is going to be available, if it's going to be only closed because of any good reason, or it's going to be public, and which data is going to be public, which data is going to be closed, if there is any software that is needed to understand the data or documentation. We're talking now about data, but also the code you may use. For instance, many people is using a well-known code repository called GitHub or GitLab, so that places where you can also share and link your code with your data. And as I said, if there is a restriction, how access is granted, if it's possible to grant the access. In the interoperability, it's how to explain how you're going to achieve some degree of interoperability, probably by use of a control vocabularies or ontologies, or by using of code books that may help the understanding of your data. And finally, the reusability, as I said, is not just to say that my data is going to be open, because if data is not going to be open, then to understand if it's possible to grant any information about how to the data can be accessed. You may also say that you will establish some periods of embargo, so meaning I will have the data in my own facilities, but not to they're gonna not be shared till the end of the project or when I publish some publications, etc. So that's the idea of the reusability. And as another templates, we also have some place to explain about the security and if there is any point of how my data is going to need to be secure, if my storage facility fulfills the requirements of the national laws or the European laws, and of course, if there is any ethical issue, how you're going to cover. So by passing your research to an ethical committee or anything that is required. And from this point, I also want to share with you some reflections about personal data. And my reflection is that fair data, when we deal with personal data, is the last thing we need to think about it. So meaning that what is important when we are interacting with humans is that we design our research, taking into account all the privacy and the personal rights and the ethical issues. So we need to design our research taking into account the privacy of the people. We need to also contact our data officers. All the research institutions have someone where you can reach and ask about how we're going to process the personal data. And they might also ask you to have this data protection impact assessment. It's important also to assess if you're going to manage the data in a following all the rules and the regulations. This is not a requirement for all the research. It's something that your data officer will tell you. And then what is very important is to inform any participant in your research. It's not just that you have a document where they have to click. It's also that you provide enough information that to understand what is the implications of taking part of your research, and afterwards also to place your data, your outputs in a controlled place and a safe place. And at the end, we will discuss if it's possible to share part of this data in a fair way. This is a similar approach from the University of Rotterdam, and this is some strategies that you may use to share some data by anonymizing or pseudo-anonymizing the data. Of course, you can use nicknames, you can use coverage, geographical coverage, or age coverage, but these are processes that are used, but you need to take into account that what is important is that they cannot be put it otherwise. So meaning that from the anonymization, you cannot get the actual information. Because sometimes the age group or the geographical coverage could help you, but if the sample is not large enough, then you can identify someone that is in this age group and is in this region. So it's important to use these processes of pseudonymization very carefully. And if you cannot do it, just say, I'm not going to share this data because it's impossible also to share it in this way. Also, if you are sharing some kind of quality data, it's not just a question of getting rid of the information of someone that you have already interviewed or interact. Sometimes in the explanation, there is also some personal data that you need also to hide, so pseudo-anonymize. So just a few tips on working with data. Just a reflection about external data. I put here a couple of examples. You will have time later on to get into more details, but these are two examples. One where you may face some public data and you may say, well, I can use it broadly. It's public, it's in the internet, no problem. But please read the terms of use, because in the terms of use, you may find surprises. So for instance, here, it's important that the data is available for research, but you need to delete everything when you finish your research. So it's important that you read the terms of use, the conditions of use of some public data, because then probably they will tell you the conditions that you can reuse. Maybe you cannot republish this data, and you may think at the beginning, well, I thought that it was public and it means that I could do anything I want. Public doesn't mean open. If there is no a specific authorization, you cannot reuse it broadly. And this is the second one. The second one is data that has an authorization, because they have what is called the CC0, Creative Commons 0. This is a kind of public domain dedication. It's a legal tool that states that you can do whatever you want with this data. And even if you want, there is not this legal requirement of acknowledging all the authors. Here, CC0 is more aimed at following the community norms. So I may say, I would suggest to cite or acknowledge or credit and make the provenance by means of the DOI, and maybe use the first name or whatever to identify that this data comes from someone else. So CC0 is a kind of a public domain, so meaning here is not just public, it's also open data. Of course, working with data, the advice is to use as much as possible standard formats and try to get avoid of proprietary formats. But of course, when it's not possible, it's not possible. If you have a specific device or your community is using a format that it's well accepted by all of you, there's no problem. Use that, because it's what is used by your community or by your devices. Of course, it's important to organize as much as possible the folders by following some conventions, especially when people move from one place to another or stays for a period of time away, and the rest of the group wants to find some data. By using of formats, names, or folders, it helps the findability of your data in your internal devices. This is a list of formats that are preferred by the National Archive from the Netherlands, and there are others that are accepted. Why I'm sharing that? Because this is the idea of if you already at the beginning plan to have your data preserved in this kind of archive, have a look at which are the best formats or the suitable formats or the preferred formats. Because if you have the choice at the beginning, it's better to choose the preferred format than the non-preferred, because probably they will commit to preserve your data for a long period of time. So meaning that if there is any change needed, they will do it. If you use non-preferred formats, if this format is not useful anymore in, let's say, 5-10 years, your data will be not reused then. This is another example of how to establish some kind of organization in your folders and names. Here is an example also to have a good documentation. When you start creating your data, you can already start by documenting your data, and it will be easier when you share your data. And at the end also, something that is important to take into account is, well, there are many places where you can store and save your data, and probably there are many solutions, but at the different moments. Of course, I can use a USB to change one data from another, one data from one device to another device, but this is not the safe place where I must keep the data. So probably you will have a lot of facilities around you in your research centers, and ask them which are the ones that fulfill the requirements of your institutions, or even the national laws or the European regulations, and then you please fulfill these requirements. You need to think about when you need these storage facilities. When you conducting your research, it's important to know which are these facilities. When you want to preserve, also it's important to know where I can preserve my data or my outputs. And at the end, if I want to give access, also to take into account which are the facilities. Here, this is an example from the Netherlands also, and you see here that there are some elements that are repeated. So there are facilities that can work for one thing and the other, and other facilities that are only designated to work for one purpose. So ask your institutions, and they will provide you with this information. And also, when we discuss about sharing data, we can also think about where and how. And as I said, where the first option is subject-based repositories. Here is a link to register of repositories. Secondly, your institution or national repositories. And finally, there are these multi-purpose repositories like Zenodo, or commercial ones like Figshare and Mendeley Data. There is here an explanation of the difference among these multi-purpose repositories. It's something that was made a few years ago by the Catalan libraries of the universities. And here there are the main features of the different multi-purposes. Of course, these multi-purposes may have some restrictions on the size of the data sets or the number of data sets. But of course, this is for free. If you want some specific conditions, you may pay, and then you will get more and more space, size, etc. And if you are based in Catalonia, if you work in any Catalan research center or university, we have established what we call the repository for research data. And this is a single repository for all the research system in Catalonia. So we have decided not to have our institutional repository, but to work together and also to establish a community of practice. And this morning, just before we have this session, there was another meeting of this group of people that share periodically so the different strategies on how to manage data. In Madrid also there is a similar group, and in some countries they have done that at the national level. Probably it's easier to work together to make these communities of practice and also to fulfill the requirements of this European Open Science Cloud. If we fulfill it with one repository, it will be enough instead of having 40 or 50 repositories. And of course, when we want to share data openly, we will need license. You can use the Creative Commons license or the CC0 that I mentioned before, but there are other options. The Open Data Commons is also an initiative that created some licensing specifically for data. The Creative Commons license can be used for any purpose, but all of them are less used and it's not they are not recommended for code. For code also, there are GPLs and BSD and other license that can fulfill any requirement to share your data openly. But also you can share your data closed, and this is an initiative created in Harvard together with the Dataverse, that is the software used for many repository data. And the idea, as I said, is like to share data in a closed way. So fulfilling the fair data principles, but providing publicly availability when it's possible, but also controlling access when it's needed. And this is a classification that was proposed many years ago, and that we are working on trying to establish in this Catalan repository to try to provide information by means of the metadata, but also to have this control on restricted access, and even thinking about encryption if it's needed because the data is very sensitive. This is also how it looks, this idea of sharing data by means of a data user agreement. So these kind of documents can be also published or linked into the repository, providing this information to fulfill the reusability of the FAIR principles. Here to end, I also put a link to some document with best practices for health science that might help you to review it and to have a look to fulfill this idea of have this optimal reuse of the data was as one of the goals that was established in this Amsterdam call. Okay, until now the explanation. I have some examples here that we might. I just will go fast to show you, and then I will give the floor for any questions, comments you have. This is a real DMP from a European project. You have the link, and here, as I said, there is a first explanation on that the DMP follows the FAIR data principles. Here, as you see, there is some graphics on how they follow all these data principles and the data life by having a catalog, providing access, harmonizing the different data, following a process of quality, and at the end, going again to the catalog. There is some questions about the summary. So they have the questions and then they answer to the questions by means of tables. This is an example of how you can have a template, but also you can have your own tables with all the explanation or what, like internal tables. You can use that if you want. I mean, as I said, an output management plan is something that must be useful for you. So you can establish any condition you want, any document you want to improve the way you may manage your outputs. This is another example from another project where they have defined the different data types, and then they have the origins, they link to a work package, and they establish the format. And then when they begin to say this is public, this is not public, they explain why this needs to be open or needs to be closed. And of course, they also have thought about alternative solutions. Here is a project where they have some interviews, they interact with people, and of course, some of the information cannot be open, and they explain why it's open, why it's not open, and they might share some kind of aggregated information at the end. This is the table when they decide which data is going to be public, which data has restricted access, etc. And finally, some cases from the health research. The first is a point that sometimes we are seeing that say process data will be publicly available in scientific articles. So this is not a good solution. You may say that the data is going to be public at the same time that scientific articles, but data should not be embedded in the articles. We know that in the past, we did that in the past by embedding our data there by tables, etc. But what is important is that data, as I said, should be published independently and also define it independently with specific titles, with specific abstracts, etc. So this option of open access journals will be preferred option to publish data. It's not a good option. You can publish open access journals, fine, but please link these papers with your data that it's published in a specific repository data. Okay, so the last one is the one that we may say fulfills the requirements of the FAIR. Results will be published in international peer review, open access journals, and data sets will be made available in public repositories. The same formats, think about it, which is the best formats. This is some examples. Of course, if you have specific formats, so use these ones. It could be here for videos, for microscopy, for anything. That is the explanation of the formats and are fine. I mean, if you are using these formats, are fine. Nobody will tell you, don't use Excel or don't use common separated values, because at the end is the format you choose. Of course, it could be, we can't recommend one or the others, but if sometimes you have some format with some specifications that is good for you, that's good enough for everyone. In the FAIR principles, then you need to explain, for instance, here they say our experimental data, they're going to be maintained until the end of the results are patented or published. Data will be published after in a repository, etc. The institutions are free to decide how they handle any remaining data, but try to be as concrete as possible. So don't say we're going to decide that at the end. No, the importance of planning is that you take already some decisions, if possible, from the beginning to avoid some misunderstandings at the end. Here, there is another explanation that the data will become available in the public domain after submission, or that the documentation will be available upon request. Here is, if we put that upon request, means that they're gonna not be open. So then please specify why are not going to be open, and you prefer or you need to facilitate that upon request. And final data will be submitted for publication as required by the most reputable scientific journals. Sometimes I remember when I saw that, I said, well, it's not just the most reputable scientific journal that requires that. It's also your funder, in this case, La Caixa, who is requiring that. So it's not just a question that it's the question of the publisher. It's also review your policy, because La Caixa Foundation is asking for that. Here also some explanations about the EU recommendation. Okay, again, it's not the EU that is granting you this project, it's the La Caixa. So look at what's La Caixa asking for that. And here also another example on by using the DOIs and how the DOIs can be connected, the articles and the data. And that's it. I think we have time now for questions, comments. So please raise your hand, use the chat. I'm happy to answer. Thank you. No questions? No comments? Everything understood? If not, then I think we can.
Yeah.
Oh, Miguel, are you?
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
please
you.
go ahead, Miguel Angel.
Thank you for your presentation, very comprehensive, because we are all dealing with all these DMP, but it's been very comprehensive. Now, when we go down to our specific data, in the case, in my case, I'm more like related with experimental data, with spectroscopy data. And the point is, spectra have so very many formats that in the end, you have to create even a way to have a standardized format or indication of those things. And are there tools available also to handle a specific kind of data, like imaging data, spectroscopy data, or how to handle that?
I'm not an expert in this field, even though I'm a physicist, but we can have a look and see, especially looking at where are you going to preserve the data. So we might have a look. We can arrange a meeting and have a look at different strategies on how to use the most suitable data for reusability at the end.
Just a brief comment. I don't want to take all the time.
But
we have seen that there is like what is called a Nexus format. We are dealing with HDF5 formats that apparently people at synchrotrons are using. We are making more like vibrational spectroscopy. These things can be implemented there, but in the end, that appears to be like a format where you have the spectra data and also all the metadata, so that appears to be quite an interesting.
Yes, in fact, Miguel Angel, we were discussing the other day with some people that doing spectroscopy, and they were doing also with the synchrotron, discussing about how to share this information. So I will be available for you, I mean, for all of you. So please contact me and we can have a discussion on that.
I know your face, I know where you work, so I can find you. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much. Ana Planas, please.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation, and well, I know your work, so it's excellent, and I'm very glad that you'll be assessing for these projects here. I unfortunately was a bit late, and I could not see the beginning, but my question is always, we've tried for a long, once we've been aware that all this data has to be public, and we need to put the data, not only the publications, but the data in repositories and so on. I've tried hard, and it takes so much time, and the students are busy with other things, and I find it that we really need somebody to help to do that. I mean, my concern is, should I really hire someone just to deal with this? Part-time, maybe can be shared by other people, I don't know, but I really find it very hard to achieve my wish that would be to make everything in repositories, any kind of data, images, spectroscopy, whatever, it's hard. And I like the theory, but I don't know how to implement it in my lab.
Yes, it's probably is the most challenging. We are trying to develop these new profiles. They are known as the data stewards, and in some places, I'm sorry to use always the Netherlands, but because probably the Netherlands is one of the countries that are more advanced than that. They have data stewards in some universities, some research centers. In some universities, they have it for each faculty. They have one or two data stewards that they are coordinated. Here, some institutions are now hiring these data stewards. I'm aware that some universities, through these Investigo plans, they have hired some specific people to help you. I mean, when I mean you, mean researchers. And of course, it depends on the size of your institution. It's more or less difficult. So we are on that. The Spanish strategy for open science, the Catalan strategy for open science are mentioning that they want to create these profiles, and they want to train people on making this role of a stewardship. But I think we are still in the beginning. So now
I work for the CSIC, and I think at CSIC they have advanced a lot, but not at the point to have someone to help you directly, or at least I'm not aware of it. And well, this is how I hesitate, or maybe we could hire somebody by part-time, or I don't know.
Yes, that's what people begin to do. And of course, probably one of the points is that people who start with research management, data management, or these issues were initially people from the libraries. So they are more focused on the publication. But as I said at the beginning, it's important to take that from the beginning and not just for at the end when we publish. So it's important also that people in the libraries get more engaged with the researchers from the beginning, and to discuss that from planning and not just for at the end of publication. I'm not in the CSIC, so I cannot help you in this thing, but in some universities we are trying to do that, to try to, as we were saying with Miguel Angel at the beginning, that we can already at the beginning discuss which could be the strategy on the sharing, etc. But hopefully we'll see a change in the next years.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you. Luis, please go ahead. I think you still okay. That's it.
Thank you for the very informative session. Excellent. It's incredibly helpful to help us to deal with the necessary advertisement of the data. Fully agree. Everything will be made public. My question is rather specific on the issue of potential intellectual property around the data that we'll make public. And what I wanted to ask specifically is that, is it fine that we couple the full release of data with the publication of a paper itself, as once we put the data in the public domain, we can no longer seek intellectual property protection? But we usually define that with the publication of a paper. So if we would publish a paper and in parallel, we release all the data in the ways that you demonstrated today, would that be acceptable? Or is it really important that we release the data as we produce it?
I mean, it's a decision that you can choose. Usually what is important is that when you publish, you release the data at the same time to somehow validate the results you have published. Nobody really will tell you to publish at this initial moment when you gather the data, because we understand that for a period of time you need to analyze, you need to work with the data, etc. And related with the intellectual property, there are different ways, because usually when you publish, let's say in the traditional way, you are required to transfer the data. The intellectual property or the copyright to the publisher. But when you publish the data, I'm not saying...
No, the issue is that once the data is accessible, it's in the public domain in some way, it's no longer possible to get intellectual property protection on that.
Well, it depends, because I mean, we can understand intellectual property very broadly. I mean, intellectual property could be copyright, but also could be patents and whatever. Of course,
I'm specifically talking about patents. And
if you want to patent anything,
we cannot foresee what something that we're going to discover is potentially subjectable to getting a patent. So if we start that process and in the output management panel say, okay, we are going to release the data as we produce it, which is desirable and the most progressive defensors of the absolutely public data. That's what they suggest, that you have this very dynamic way of sharing the data, and it should be appear and available for all colleagues as we produce them and get it. That precludes any attempt to get any intellectual property, including patents on it.
Then, Luis, what you have to do is not to share the data immediately. I mean, that's what probably the most common strategy is, to keep your data until the end. So if you publish, you cannot patent. I mean, it's the same problem. So
yes, that's why I'm asking it if it's acceptable.
It's completely acceptable to say I'm gonna
couple the act of publishing classically with papers to the complete release of the data that we have in the ways that you're telling us that are desirable.
It's the same. It's the same, Luis.
So if that's fine, it's
it's completely fine. And also you can also another thing that it's completely acceptable is that you say I'm gonna keep my primary data for further results, and I don't want to open everything. I'm gonna just share, when I publish some results, some part of my data. So let's kind of secondary data. I'm gonna keep the other data. So that's what I was telling you at the beginning, that nobody will ask you to require to publish your data immediately, because everybody understands these different strategies like the one you just mentioned.
Very good. Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you.
There was another hand raised from Departamento Biotecnología. You loud your hand, but
no,
please
hello.
go ahead.
No, I had a question, but it's already answered in the chat, so I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Great.
Any other question? I don't know, Monica, you want to say?
Yeah,
Please,
I think you have some also in the chat. Maybe you can have a look on there by Joanna Cora.
Okay. I think thank you for this. Yes, the question from Joanna is asking if you have different institutions. What is important is to have it in one place. At the end, as I said, probably if you have already a thematic repository, that's the place. If you don't have that, then you can choose one institution. And sometimes when you have multiple institutions, they agree on going, like, as I said, the neutral repository that could be Zenodo. In Zenodo, you can place there. You have the DOI. You have a metadata schema that is completely suitable with the FAIR principles. So this could be an option. Usually with data, we try to avoid the replication of data in multiple repositories. So it would be easier to choose one, and it's up to you to decide which is the most suitable for you. And the second one was when, I think I already answered.
Ignacio, yes, you can go ahead with Miguel Ángel Bañares.
Yes, because I think the others are already covered. So Miguel Ángel, again, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's just another thing that came to my mind. Actually, I put a link of a paper of a colleague who is working on eNanoMapper, which is a platform integrating a lot of data for toxicity of nanomaterials, Nina Jeliaskova. She doesn't like Excel, and you have already said it's by no means a preferred option. But like you said, many people is using it. So she made this paper telling how to make the best that you can do with Excel. So that can be an interesting piece of work. But we always have the same challenge, the data, how we get the data, story associated with the data. What is your opinion about laboratory notebooks? How can they help us? Because there are many options. At the CSIC, we don't really have a policy for laboratory notebooks. And I look at many and I don't really know if they can really help us or how to handle that.
It's a good question, because but it's also, again, it's something that probably some people will tell you that they are good to have these platforms of laboratory notebooks. There's still people still using paper. Of course, I think they are useful if they provide you with the needs you require. So it's up to you. I mean, it's not a mandatory or to share these laboratory notebooks beyond the laboratory. So I think at the end it helps to a group to establish some parameters and to establish the like the diary of what are you doing. But I'm don't have any preference for one or the other tools. It's a decision that you have to take.
Yeah, many things changing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Susana, yes.
Hi, I was just listening to this Miguel about the lab notebooks, and I don't know. I'm not sure about the answer, but I really think that electronic lab books can help at least the team to get used to sharing. And it is easier then to pick up the data and, it is already organized in a digital way. And I believe it is much easier to transfer then and to put it in repositories and to organize. But again, I would say that the data stewards are really important. I'm just wondering, I read somewhere that there is funding for recruiting, for example, data stewards, because in the end, the institutions will say it's a financial burden, everything, because you have to have good project managers and good data stewards and adopt electronic lab books, which are also more expensive. So how are we going to keep the system sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with your last reflection. I also, I mean, this kind of training, we have done some training also with some more technical profiles from your institutions. And I think also the institutions need to provide not just the human resources to help you, but also with some protocols and some definitions and some. So what I mean is that to help you of establishing some standard procedures that will facilitate your research. Because if we don't do that, it's like beginning again and again. So it's important also to, from the point of view of the institutions, if we want to reach this goal of making our research, our science more open, more collaborative, etc., to provide you with that, because we cannot just put more and more work on you, and also we need to establish some priorities on our budgets and doing that. I don't know about the eligibility cost of that in your project. That's something that maybe Monica can answer. But if I know that some funders have some budget for this.
Thank you. It was very useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I can just comment that our budget is pretty open. So we have the items that you already know, but we also have that item, which is called others, which is maybe a good place to suggest this budget for that. Yeah. Okay, you, I don't know if we have any other question. Ignacio, we have to tell you, as usual, thank you so much for this session. Also, thank you to be on board in our research area for helping us to give all these tools to our awardees to have the knowledge, but also some tools to complete this open management plan that is now coming out in many calls, that is requested in many calls. And also, let me remind to the awardees that you and your team, you are behind our platform in that side where they have to fill this open management plan, and they can always contact you for help or for questions for your support in this part of the implementation of the output management plan. So if we don't have any other question, just we can finish here this year. And then any other question, you can just contact Ignacy or, of course, us, and we can put in touch with Ignacy and his team. Okay, so Susanna, you have a question? No, okay. So we finished.
So thank you very much for attending to this session. And sure. As Monica just said, happy to help you. And please contact me if you have any question.
Thank you. So
bye.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.